Record.
So, Brendan and Quinn, you were saying about this idea of Zarathustra awakening, and he sees this devil, and he goes, "Oh, it's actually not my doctrines." I was trying to look for the quote. Oh yeah, why was it? So one morning, however, he awoke before dawn, deliberately long upon his bed, and at length spoke to his heart. Why was I so frightened in my dream that I awoke? Did not a carrying child carrying a mirror come to me? O Zarathustra, the child said to me, look at yourself in the mirror. But when I looked into the mirror, I cried out, and my heart was shaken, for I did not see myself. I saw a sneering grimace of a devil. Truly, I misunderstand the dream's omen and warning all too well. My doctrine is in danger. Weeds want to be called wheat. My enemy have grown powerful and have distorted the meaning of my doctrine, so that my dearest ones are ashamed of the gifts I gave them. And so, Quinn, you were saying about the danger of misinterpretation, and my question to you is, in this field of Nietzschean interpretation that we have with all of these different characters, Foucault, Heidegger, Evola, and a lot of these disciples of Nietzsche being Nietzschean, but writing things that Nietzsche wouldn't like. And Nietzsche has this sort of dynamic where he says, imitate me, but don't imitate me, be yourself. So how do we cross that tightrope of
Yeah, I
obviously
think you can.
okay,
I think
go
you
on.
could just stick with the image of the that comes up in the dream, right? He looks in a mirror, and then what does he get troubled by? He gets troubled by a devil's grimace. But if he woke up in the dream and saw this mirror, and in the mirror is Foucault's face, is that the same as the devil's face? I mean, it's unavoidable that there's going to be differences from what he's really trying to get across when people interpret him. I think maybe that's a way to try to think about that kind of question is what type of reflection of his philosophy would trouble him versus which possible interpretations that wouldn't necessarily be identical to what he's saying would not trouble him, would be like, yep, that's actually, that's great, that's excellent, thank you for inventing that out of what I offered.
Hey, this
Yeah, I think this connects to
oh, go ahead, Quinn.
well, I was just gonna say, yeah, kind of if we're kind of playfully thinking of Nietzsche and kind of like as kind of a crazy wisdom teacher or more of a tantric manner. I think I heard this from Alexander Bard. He was talking about how these, sort of crazy wisdom teachers behave in such a manner so that they're almost they sort of avoid the propensity for imitation, which is obviously a kind of fundamental dynamic anytime you get, teacher student or whatever, guru disciple. It's like that kind of transference, which obviously I think Nietzsche is fundamentally against, and he's constantly saying to his, say like, don't imitate me, like, sort of connect with your own internal wellspring, but that dynamic of identifying and then imitating and sort of that Girardian way is so fundamental. That I think that, to me, part of Nietzsche's style makes it nearly impossible, right? Makes it so difficult to imitate him in some ways. Like he's saying, right, with your own blood. He even says in one of these sections that we read, he's like, the only thing that matters is sort of like truth born from sort of your own fire, and this sort of idea. I don't know if he would look at like, I think he might see the diversity of interpretation as kind of a beautiful thing. However, this passage does invite the possibility that there is maybe some form of interpretation that he sees as sort of like fun, as kind of an erosion of his teaching, right? So maybe there is there can be a myriad of different interpretations that take it in a whole plethora of directions. But maybe, I don't know, maybe if it starts to become a kind of like, life denying, if it gets swallowed up and sort of, well, actually I would say he talks about in one of the passages that we read, he talks about, people, sort of preaching of life, but
Yeah.
actually sort of being death worshippers, you know.
But
So,
let
so
me
I think yeah,
let me read it to
I'm
you. He
not sure
says,
where
"My
that was.
friends."
Yeah.
He says this in the Tarantulas. He says, "My friends, I do not want to be confused with others or taken for what I am not. These are those who preach my doctrine of life, yet are at the same time preachers of equality and tarantulas." So,
Right.
if we think of Nietzsche's work as a sort of a life-affirming Play-Doh, the Play-Doh that you played with as a kid, right? How can it be life-affirming if a philosopher comes along and takes certain aspects of Nietzsche's work, but actually doesn't, like, let's say, for instance, for argument's sake, Foucault values equality, which I think he does. Let's say, for instance, he values equality. He's going against the whole arc of Nietzsche's philosophy, bringing it back to Superman. It turns the philosophy into a philosophy for the rabble.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I would like to say on this point that Nietzsche's last work was gonna be on the will to power, and he didn't finish it. So perhaps if you would want to work from Nietzsche but not mimic him, this is the place, And I think that what psychoanalysis does, especially with Lacan, is that not the will to power is like the central telos and driver of human action and the way that communities work, but it's about jouissance, surplus enjoyment. And this is so I think that like by exchanging the will to power for jouissance, for surplus enjoyment, you still retain the Nietzschean core, like Cadell wrote about in his papers, in his articles, but also you go beyond Nietzsche. I think that's it. That's
Two questions here. Can you be a Nietzschean in this sense if you do what he has said here? Like, I mean, can you be a Nietzschean if you're not for, if you don't take the order of rank seriously? If you actually, as he says here, start to preach equality? Can you be a Nietzschean in stronger terms if you preach slave morality?
Well, I think that any academic interpretation of Nietzsche, most of them at least, is just a way to digest it and dilute what is actually being said.
Yeah, I would tend to think to be Nietzschean, you kind of have to take that order of rank seriously. But on the flip side, I think, I was sort of talking to Cadell about that in the chat, but I think that, yeah, if you were out there preaching equality, like you were pushing for that, then yeah, you're absolutely distant from what he's trying to do. But at the same time, I'm just not sure that it's the flip of that, where you're out there pushing for some particular order of rank, that may just arise without you needing to help it along at all. So I don't know, I think there's something subtle there. But also, just in the Will to Power notebooks, just one little point that I think is kind of clarifying on that passage about life. He talks about something about, his point is that why is life's goal not more life? Well, life is already life, so it doesn't make sense for it to have like a desire, like a will to life. Like that can't be its function or purpose. That's the kind of sense he gets at in the Will to Power notebooks. And I think there's something that might be sat on a little bit with that passage about, okay, these people who are just about like, we're just affirming life. I think he's saying, well, first of all, life doesn't need affirmed for itself. And if anything needs affirmed, it's not that. Life is already succeeding in that sense.
Very good.
yeah.
And any thoughts? Any thoughts on the? Or sorry, go on, Dimitri.
Yeah, he also, not only in the notebooks on the will to power, but also some chapter here in the also sprach Zarathustra, he talks about this, and I think the one who brought this forth in the funniest way is a Bronze Age pervert. This idea that you have life for life's sake, Bronze Age perfect compares it to yeast,
Well, this is there's a
amorphous
uh,
blob which just
there's a
grows.
there's a there's a brilliant academic paper in a commentary on Nietzsche's Zarathustra, and they say that freedom for Zarathustra is freedom for what? It's not freedom from what. What are you? Why? Why do you value freedom? What are you going to do with your life? It's not just to exist; it's to actually do something. Quinn, any thoughts on the equality aspect?
Yeah. I mean, it's a tough passage. I mean, I feel like I have to unpack a little bit more. It's just unpack what he means by the will to power and how he distinguishes that from life. It feels like a very creative will. And so in that way, it's not just a pure affirmation of life, but it's sort of an actual, it's more of a creation, a creation of life, right? You could live, a whole life and simply just affirm whatever is happening without sort of like taking that sort of agency and power to kind of create for yourself. So that feels important. And I mean, I think you could probably make a Nietzschean argument in a sense of like equality, sort of like creating the conditions of possibility for more and more human beings to maybe aspire towards the overman, which obviously would lead to probably more diversity rather than sort of like kind of equality of outcome or sort of the just a bunch of replications. So maybe there's a way to argue for a kind of equality there.
But you're still
but
affirming. You're still affirming order of rank. All you're saying there is let's sort of open it a bit more, that people come more people come in.
Yeah, exactly. And some people are probably more disposed to be, to want to aspire towards the overman for whatever reason. Their disposition just gravitates towards that, So it's like if it would be like, oh, we want each individual equally aspiring towards the overman. It's like, okay, that that's not the kind of equality. Obviously, I think he would be in favor of. But
I have some thoughts on this because I think that it's all the same shit. I think democracy, Marxism. Of course, like you can read Marx and Engels, and they say, yeah, we're not for equality of outcome. We're for the equal chances. You get this from the writings of Marx and Engels. They're not stupid. They have this basic understanding that if you preach equality of outcome, it's just it doesn't make sense. So I think the problem for Nietzsche is that. So I hope you can hear all this shit happening.
No, it's okay. Don't worry about it.
No, you're good.
Okay, that in their moaning about all the injustice that's happening in the world is the sound of revenge.
Yes.
And in all their lofty proclamations is doing pain. So one very simple example. I know someone and I just had a conversation with her, and at some point in the conversation, she said like, "Oh yeah, I really." And she was a leftist, obviously. Said that I really want to burn down the crypto warehouses or something like that. And it's like,
The crypto one.
warehouses, whatever. Like it's this idea that it's like they are injustice, so it has to be burned down, and there will be this major enjoyment in doing pain. Like shows to me that it's all just bullshit. And you can say, like, as a Marxist, you can say, oh, it's more nuanced than that, and we can synthesize Marx and Nietzsche. But I think actually, if anyone is synthesizing Barth and Nietzsche correctly, I think it's Nietzsche and Marx correctly. It's Alexander Barth. This idea that the proletariat is just some kind of community of people striving for the overman that will exit, this exodus, and not force everyone to go along with.
Even I would project that. I mean, the rabble are, look, the masses. I think they should just let them have the lives that they want. You know what I mean? Just A lot of people just want to grow up, have a job, have a wife, have kids, and just not be, but they're not, they don't have an interest in any of this shit. You have to be a weirdo to be in this. If you look at,
You
and I
kind, you
can't remember
fucking do, man. Yeah.
I mean, like, if you look at anything that is worth anything in this life that we have, science today, philosophy, it's all done by madmen. It's not done by normal people. I mean, please. And if we desecrate that border distinction that somebody like Vermeer, Nietzsche, or Hegel, where they have crafted and spent their lives and sort of gone mad in this, and then just plonk, Hegel beside some fat guzzling McDonald's eating person. I mean, it's the greatest crime. The greatest crime. Not to be overly, punish the mass or the rabble to for it, but just we have to know that distinction.
Yeah.
There's
That's kind of
nothing
like
worse than
a little bit. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, my bad. Anyways, there's nothing worse, in my opinion, than getting caught up in some sort of discussion, and the next thing, like you just barely touch on something philosophical, and then one of these Philistines starts talking about how they're like everything's just there's nothing, or like they come to you with this thing like, oh, it's all just like, I don't know, it's so weird when you can't even go deep with these people. You can't go deep with most people because most people, for them, it's just all the same thing. They have this homogenizing effect on your mind.
All right, I have a question in this on this topic, because this is definitely an interesting one, and one I've encountered recently, trying to kind of just like share some of the things that I've been learning and we've been discussing with friends and other people, and often having that experience where like clearly I'm kind of like making them uncomfortable in some ways, like they don't like they're, and which is fun, which just is an interesting experience, right? And so then it's like, okay, having that awareness, like this may not be for everyone. There's a time and a place for conversations like this, and it does make me laugh that Hegel thought attempted to write the phenomenology of spirit in the sort of like for, to be exoteric, to be for, for everybody to, it's like, I don't know, man, you could have, but anyway, my question is.
Go on.
Oh yeah. What?
Can you give us an example and then give us your question? Was there an example of where this thought came from?
Yeah, there's a few. I mean, so one example, so I spent like a week and a half kind of just totally isolated, just reading and writing, and it was actually a really powerful experience, and had just like going on walks and just like breaking out into fits of laughter by myself. It was definitely the most I've enjoyed my own solitude. And then the first people I went into that I saw after that was a friend who it was someone who I hadn't met before, but was like a friend of a friend kind of thing, And I was in this sort of like just exuberant, overflowing state, and I was just very talking, sort of like in this state, and I knew I was in this state, and I even prefaced to them like, hey, sorry, I'm kind of in this like strange state. There's maybe not, the ego filter is not as strong as it usually is, and I started talking about a little bit of what I was writing about Nietzsche, and it just about my experience being in solitude and different things, and it just felt kind of flat, it was just like it was just like the conversation couldn't pick up, it was like they didn't know how to respond, and I was just like, okay. And then I got embarrassed, because I was like, oh, shit, I'm making them uncomfortable,
Shame for your
fuck,
exit.
dude, that
Oh
ego
man.
came online, and it was like, oh dude, you've totally made, just talk about the weather, shut the fuck up, like
But
totally
see,
got
that's
self-conscious.
that's the thing. To them, everything is relativistic because their own subjectivity is a- is just this flow of information to them.
Yeah.
Like,
Yes.
and there's no real depth to anything that they do.
No.
And I don't want to sound like snobbish in a way, but
Go for it.
it
Go
is
for it.
it is like the rebel can't, like, the rebel can never be tantric. Dimitri and I, we were talking about this, about how the rebel um will always objectify the tantric or the sacred.
I have a question on this, because
Yeah.
I was thinking after this experience, thinking about the Bard Absolute and this idea of having the separation. And it's definitely a shift in my thinking, because I often have thought sort of like, democratic, like democratize everything, right? Like like that's sort of the way to go. And definitely have been recognizing that, I think space, like sort of cloistered and kind of barred spaces probably naturally emerge, even if just from the sheer fact that some people like to talk about these things, and some people just don't, right? Like, and I think that's reflected in Nietzsche's, sort of speaking to a certain audience, not to everybody, right? But what then is the disposition or the relationship to the rabble or whatever, like, to, is it's, I don't think it's one of pity. I think Nietzsche would look down upon that, right? It's like, I think it's a, what's, how do you relate, like, yeah, what how do you come into relationship with with the world from that state, do you, because it seems
Well,
like almost like on an individual level, I would say you relate to people as if anybody could, sort of aspire to the overman. Like, it's almost like you
mm,
have to relate on an individual level to people as if the possibility of that spark catching is always kind of there. But then obviously you can't make the assumption that this is the right way for the entire population. I don't know.
well,
This is does that make sense? The
I,
question, it's
yeah, it does. It completely does. I mean, I think that Nietzsche is always wary of resentment and sort of this poisoning aspect. I think that Nietzsche would just say, just accept that certain, in a sense, this is what I've been doing myself. It's just people will tell you who they are through their actions. And you can't expect a dog to not be a dog, or a cat not to be a cat, or, certain people you will find, I'm on the same trip as you, Quinn, have their limitations, and you will sort of go, okay, this is something that I can push, and I can do a bit
right.
of a dance with this person. But then, and what I found is that some people can be good in certain aspects and then not so good in others. So they might be very good at art, but really bad at talking politics or philosophy. Um, but I just find acceptance and not expect. It's freeing if you don't expect everybody to be an overman.
Yeah.
Nietzsche touches this directly. He says that, okay, we come to this point already that we know that animosity is necessary for life and for self overcoming.
What?
Animosity, you need to have the best enemy to
Yes,
your greatest battles against,
Oh, yep.
to self overcome, right?
he says
So,
it's
and
Dimitri. He says it here.
please,
Oh yeah.
please. I just lost my train of thought. But once I asked myself, and I almost choked in my question, what? Does life also need the rebel? Are there poisoned wells needed and stinky fires? Dirty dreams? Not my hate, but my disgust was eating very hungrily on my life. And I got sick and tired of the spirit when I realized that even the rebel was rich of spirit.
Yes.
And that's crazy because okay, I will tell this story. I was in the park and this guy started, he sit next to me asking me for a lighter. Okay, I give it to him. We start talking, and he told me this story about how a friend of him, he got his dick sucked in the park just a few days ago. So we start talking about that, and he turned out also to be gay, so we start talking about sex and everything. And then he started flirting with me, and then I'm like, then he started asking me to he wanted to suck my dick. And I mean, we didn't go for it. I wasn't really in the mood. But like we talked about sex and like okay, what you guys said, like yeah, of course there's this superficiality to talking with people who don't go to the books or whatever. But like I find in my life that when I talk with like normal people, um, who are like quite honest about sex, that I can have so many insightful like he was gay. I was asking him like, why are you gay? How do you view women? All these kinds of questions, and he was very open about it. And uh, like it's just, I think that once you get there, like there's kind of things. Maybe it's just my own my own thing, but I feel like if you have conversations about sex or about really intimate topics, it's almost exactly the same as having philosophical conversations. It doesn't even have to be like very complex,
Absolutely.
because like
Absolutely.
for example, like
Yeah, because I think
what I
the
learned
yeah.
from very small
uh,
like what I learned from him is that homosexuals, they're basically they're almost all gonna be submissive, and they're also always almost all attracted to heterosexual
Straight
men.
men. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
like there's this kind of weird ass thing happening in sexuality that we're missing something, and there's this mystery and we want to understand it but we can't understand it. And like I will never know how it is to be like him, and like to be in a world where women aren't sexually attracted at all.
But I
I
mean,
don't think so. So there's like these when there's like this kind of difference of perspectives and you try to cross them over, it's impossible, but you can get a lot of insights of going back and forth with someone on that this
but even
Yeah,
in
just like a curiosity towards that particular person and their sort of intimate experience with life. Like that's sort of inherently philosophical, even without
yeah
entering high abstraction.
right,
Yeah,
exactly.
absolutely.
Well, I think one thing to think about with that is like with the rabble, right? That's this kind of image of a crowd or a group. Like, so there's something where
Yeah.
anytime you're interacting with any individual, no matter who they are, there may be aspects that remind you of this rabble concept, but still, I mean, I think that's part of maybe the way he would answer that of like, don't talk to the rabble, don't talk to the group like at large. But if you were to encounter any given individual, I think part of his answer would be, I don't know, be polite. Like, don't be a dick. Like, if it's someone who you're not connecting with, I think that's because it's like, yeah, he experiences that disgust there, but he also like works to overcome that disgust. Like,
well,
it's not
well,
that,
he does say
not in that
here.
passage necessarily, man, but like a big part of the whole book is like, yes, absolutely, it like some of these things can lead to feelings of disgust at like, look at this rat race, what are we doing,
Well,
that type of thing. But then
let
also
me
kind of just last little point there is like, yep, acknowledging that disgust but not staying in it.
let me challenge it on this one, because he says at the in the child with the mirror, and my enemies with them, how I now love anyone to whom I can simply speak. My enemies too are part of my happiness. Okay, that's good. And when I want to mount my wildest horse, it is my spear that best help me do it. It is never ready servant to my foot, the spear which I throw at my enemies. How I thank my enemies that at last I can throw it. The tension of my cloud has been too great between laughter peals of lightning. I want to cast hail showers into my depths. And then he goes on, truly my happiness and my freedom come like a storm, but my enemies shall think the evil one is raging over their heads. Yes, too, my friends will be terrified by my wild wisdom, and perhaps you will flee from it together with my enemies. So yeah, he's really there's a deep sense of sort of loneliness and alienation, and sort of he recognizes the terror that he's inflicting on other people.
I really think for you to understand Nietzsche, you have to understand him as basically a warrior priest. And that, and if you think about, like nobility, in the most direct sense, I mean, the nobility was a terrifying, um,
Yeah.
they were a terrifying force,
Yeah.
for all people who weren't the nobility and who weren't above the nobility. They would literally hunt peasants for fun, and they didn't care.
Yeah.
They had traditions, and it was tantric in that they were constantly intermingled with death. At least when you had, well, in any nobility, from any culture that was actively expanding and um, creating, or I should just say expanding and utilizing their power. And as soon as this sort of noble culture gets what it expands to its limits and gets all of the, I don't want to say resources, because I don't want to sound materialistic, but it is kind of once the inner circle is secured for, once the women and children are secured for, the nobility kind of gets liquidated, and all of their traditions and such are lost. So I think you really do need to think about nobility and the aristocracy historically to kind of understand Nietzsche and his dichotomy between the overman and the rabble. And I guess my reading of Nietzsche is one that you would call right wing, but I think the right and left dichotomy is sort of a shallow misunderstanding of what is truly at stake when it comes to human life. And
Garrett, I have a question for you. So how do you view the fact that for Nietzsche he was like going against the establishment of Christianity, and his whole project was destroying values and creating new values, destroying tradition and stuff like this, showing the emptiness of the heart and life denying.
so you how do you mean that in relation to what I just said? Or
Well, yeah, like because Nietzsche doesn't just uphold the old values against the new, or against whatever is emerging. He explicitly says, if you want to be a creator of values, you have to destroy values.
yeah, well, that's the mobilism at hand. And I think that you can make the argument here that um, that's how nobility is born, is through this destruction, and then a revitalization. So it's like this circular path. So it goes something like, so there's a value. It's just the old value dies, a new one is born, and then the new value becomes solidified, and then it dies, and then it's just reborn again.
Yeah,
I don't know if that actually answers your question or not, but as far as nobility goes in my reading, you can look at peoples historically and how power shifts from one culture to the next, and you could narrativize human history this way, from spirit passing from the Greeks, and from the Greeks the Romans, and from the Romans to from the Romans to the Germans, and so on and so forth. It's a very, I guess, Eurocentric view of history, but I would make the claim that outside of Europe, most cultures don't really have history the way that Europe has history.
There's a book by let me just get it here. There's a book by a guy called L'Absurdo, and he has this absolutely massive, this one here, and it's called Nietzsche, the Aristocratic Rebel. And basically, L'Absurdo is arguing what you're arguing, Garrett, that, and you do see this in some circles on the right, that they read Nietzsche as a aristocratic pagan. Now, I don't know if I would read him like that, but I'm a bit confused as to this idea that, you know, the right or whatever, or the traditionalists can't be imaginative themselves. I mean, if you're an aristocrat, your job, in a sense, is to sustain the cultural life of your society or civilization. And if you think that your society is dying or decaying or becoming fragmented, it's your job to reinvigorate it. And if Nietzsche has the diagnosis that he has about a certain part of Christianity, I mean, I don't see that why that wouldn't make him still somebody who's concerned about order of rank.
Yeah, I think he is definitely still concerned about order of rank. But with that, kind of talk about like the nobility and that type of thing. I don't think he's trying to salvage like everything brutal about the noble. Like
Yes.
I don't think he's in favor of the hunting down a human in the woods, like for sport. I mean, I'm not saying he's necessarily not for that, but not at all the sense I'm getting.
There are quotes, but there are quotes by Nietzsche defending this type of stuff.
What I'm saying is, I think he's trying to salvage an aspect of the aristocratic mindset. Absolutely. That's why when I said the way I think he would interact with the quote unquote rabble is with a lot of politeness, like a distance from them, like a I will treat you respectfully and distantly. Like I'm not here to be getting mixed up in your concerns. I have my own realm of concern. I will speak and go to war with my actual enemies, with someone who comes to challenge or just happens to be in the same realm I'm working on. But I think when it comes to the rabble kind of thing, it's like what he struggles with in that passage we read today, right, is like sharing the well, drinking out of the same wealth with them, having to at some point overcome that. Because metaphorically, right, there's only so much water. Like you can't have a nobility without a rabble. I think that's part of what the disgust that he has to overcome is that there's no way to just eradicate it. Like it's not even an option.
Yeah, I agree with that. The example of the nobles like hunting down peasants is kind of an extreme example, but yeah, I agree with you on that.
Well, and I think it's a good example to be thinking about, because those are the types of questions that I think people who have any interest in Nietzsche should seriously wrestle with, because there is that risk too of that hard reading of him that is like, yep, what he was saying was What we need are the nobles who should just be allowed to freely go do those types of things. That's a possible reading of him, I think. It's not the one I would go to, but that's, to me, that would be more, going back to the child in the mirror, in the dream, seeing the devil's face in it. Well, what is that? Why is it a devil's face? What is that devil? That could be interpreted a lot of different ways, but I think one
I
of
don't
those
know.
possible devils would be the reading of the nobility that is like, yep, we're going to sacrifice babies on the steps of an Aztecan temple.
I don't know here. I'm a bit conflicted because if you read Nietzsche, I mean, you can have a look at the Surdo book. Nietzsche isn't just coming out and saying, right, you can sacrifice babies. What he is saying is that in order to create the Superman, or in order to create any sort of great civilization, it's not going to be the sort of soft liberalism that we have at the moment. It's going to be much more dedicated to greatness. And if you're going to have that, I can't pull the quotes out at the moment that I have, but if you have that, you're going to have like, there's a big strain in Nietzsche that's sort of illiberal, anti-democratic, pro, hierarchy, and in some senses anti-modern. And a lot of these sort of values would make, contemporary intellectual queasy. So I'm a bit conflicted.
I mean, I think queasy is an excellent feeling to be just experiencing, wrestling with, and thinking about with him, because there are possible readings of him that would lead to a society that I think a lot of people who think they read Nietzsche and are like, yep, that sounds great. Like, you're right. Like, there's there may be wars that he would be totally okay with, and that type of thing that I'm not sure it's easy to even think about. In the last part of the book, when he has the kings come up the mountain, right, and they're talking about, yes, we're kind of ready for war. We brought the swords off the wall of our fathers. We're kind of ready for this. And he kind of chuckles to himself, because these kings, like, they're speaking as if they're ready for war, as if they're ready for that type of thing. But they, in their life, have actually lived a soft life of kings. They never actually were in war. So yeah, I'm not trying at all say we shouldn't be thinking about that stuff. I think it's super critical to, like, interpreting him.
I think it helps to think this aspect in a way, in terms that you have to be willing to think about people in the archetypal sense, and there's all sorts of people on the planet, and there's all sorts of people within human societies, and it's about how you deal with the certain personages that emerge from your societies, from your tribe. And we don't really have a real warrior culture anymore. We don't really have a lot of values are just gone. You don't really have a priestly caste the way that basically what I'm trying to get at is all of the past values that held any sort of sanctifying value for man are kind of gone, and it's because everyone's been homogenized into this one thing. And I think if instead you were to allow people to actually if you allowed people the freedom to explore their personality, and gave them direction for whatever archetypal personality they have, I think you could actually begin to have a culture again.
Yeah, I agree. I think one thing to key in on is, again, with the Tarantula, what he's criticizing is not just that they want equality, but that they preach equality. The sort of screaming a broad message, like, and making that the central of
Yes.
everything.
Yeah.
I think what he would recommend is something that's not just an alternative preaching. Like he's not saying, okay, well, they're preaching this, so I should therefore come up with a different thing that we broadcast to everyone. But rather, okay, I'm going to go about it more naturalistically. Like you think about that, it's like, it's not like equality that then has no function in Nietzsche in his own thinking, or this is like, you think about an example of like a coach who's going to teach a bunch of little kids soccer or something. Like it's, you know, if it's a coach who's like, okay, we're going to have all the players be exactly equal, you know, he's not like that. But equality would play a function in the sense of, I'm going to try to bring you up to my equal level, like recognizing the difference that already exists to begin with, and then also recognizing you're never going to create an actual equality. But equality and that type of thing, I think it still has a place as like as a tool, but like making it as a final goal and insisting that everything already is equal, and if it's not, make it equal, and the equality that we're going to try and make is try to drag everybody down to its common level. I mean, I think that's what he criticizes in The Rabble, is this idea that like equality, yeah, we should be equal, and what does that mean? Well, we should all be equally lazy.
I think the opposition here is between equality and justice. Equality is something that men preach, and justice is something that nature already gives. It's something already inherent to us.
That's exactly the way I read it, is like, yep, it's there's inequality already naturally given. You're not going to erase it. Like, that's why I think a big part of his answer to that to the preachers of equality is really to just pass them by. Like, as much as possible, don't feed into their argument. Don't give them more territory by just like, because then you force yourself into this whole language of theirs, and then you've totally restricted life down to now this conversation about equality. Whereas that's not even the most central question of anything. Like, if you just don't respond, it doesn't mean like they win necessarily, if that makes sense. Like, you could just go out and do your thing. I think that's, you know, going back to the talk about the nobility, when he's in other books, right, talking about the goodness of the nobility. Well, what he meant by that was just kind of their naturalism. Like, it wasn't that they called themselves good, other than the sense that they said, oh, we're good. What we're doing is just fine. Like, we don't need to change just because someone's demanding we change.
Okay, so we have sort of seen, there seems to be this polarity then of two different types of spirit that Nietzsche is playing with here. Now, let's just bracket for the time being the genealogy of morals. Of course, if you want, you can bring that in. But before, let's say we were reading Nietzsche before he's written the genealogy of morals, and we see this dualism within the soul of humanity, just from Zarathustra so far. And one drive seems to be a sort of compassionate, sort of false virtue. And another one that seems to be, what do you think these two drives are? Any thoughts?
Can you repeat that last bit, Mike?
So a lot of what he's talking about here in this, he's drawing or describing one part of humans, you know what I mean? These two drives that people can have are two characteristics of people. There's the compassionate, priests fit into this as well. So the priests, for example, they wrote letters of blood on the path they followed, and their folly taught that truth is proved by blood. But blood is the worst witness of truth. Blood poisons and transforms the purest teaching to delusion and hatred of the heart. So there's this type of person, these type of people, the rabble that he calls them, that are reaching equality, but really they're secretly motivated by revenge. And then there's this other spirit that he's trying to give food to. So my two questions is do you have any thoughts on these two spirits that seem to be having a battle of some sorts? And then also my second question is in regards to this idea of blood. I mean, he's saying in this section that blood is the worst witness of truth. Blood poisoned and transforms the purest teachings to delusion and hatred. Does this not sort of fly in the face what he said before, right in your own blood?
Well, what do you think, Max?
I think this is a it's a fucking hard one, to be honest with you, for me, because my whole presentation is based on this idea of blood writing and limit experiences and sacrificial writing. I don't know. I think that it's how to come back to he's saying it here. I mean, there seems to be an interesting aspect where the priest is sort of inward lookingness. I'm looking to fill myself up. And I will come down and I will literally put my life on the line, because I'm overflowing with love. And what happens, so be it. But the priest seems to write in his blood out of revenge, not out of overflowing, out of an emptiness and a necessity for power, that he's sort of like a vampire.
That last thing about the vampire, I think that's a key to, focusing on the difference between those two passages about blood. First one where he's talking about writing in blood. I love what is written in one's own blood. And then in the second passage, he's talking about, the priests writing, what all that is proven in blood is just nothing. I prefer what is proven in one's own fire. Well, is he talking about them writing in their own blood then, or is he talking about them writing in the blood of everyone else?
Yeah, that's how I read that one too.
Very good, very good. So if we are to expand on this, the two drives that we're dealing with, is it that these sort of compassionate priests, these sort of rabble people, they're really people who externalize everything? They're not people who really sort of look within themselves at all. What is the conditions that make up these type of people, and then what are the conditions that make up these sort of noble people that Nietzsche's talking about?
I would like to say something about this, because I think Nietzsche touches it. I don't know what passages at this moment, but there seems to be this phenomenon that the priest, or maybe even the wise man, or the tarantula, he has some kind of knowledge, or like knowledge about morality, and then wants to like impose it on the other. So whereas, okay, if we look at this conversation, we're all talking and we all assume that we don't know it all. We all assume that
yes,
we all have something, we can give to the other, and we all have something that the other can gives to us, which are insights. So this is how we have a conversation that's between friends, you know. And it seems like what the priest does is like every time it's he seems to use his intellect to because he's weak in that sense, like he is too weak to have this natural flowing of the will to power, with all its, you know, convulsions. So he just uses his intellect to bring the spirit of heaviness in an intellectual manner to whoever he is talking to. That's something that comes up for me.
So is there, Adorno talks about this idea of instrumental reason, that in the dialectic of enlightenment, that the enlightenment turns everything into an object, that I don't actually look at things to be used in sort of as a craftsmanship that you would see with Plato, but that just these people over there are just people to be herded around. Would you say that instrumental reason is part of this priestly attitude?
Uh, I think, I mean, I haven't read the dialectic of enlightenment, uh, but for sure, I think, you know, Hegel talks kind of, he talks about very similar topics when he talks about, what was it, faith and pure insight. That there's this battle that goes on between the ones who have faith, you know, like the kind of priest, and then the like the how do you say it, um utilitarian, like this kind of thing,
Yes,
very much.
exactly.
I think, you know, the problem with, like, I just read something that Daniel Frege wrote in the IDW, and it was about tech and this kind of stuff. And, you know, if you go on YouTube and you look up MacBook Air or what kind of piece of technology, there will be so many whatever reviews, unboxings, all of this stuff. And you know, like, people watch it not because everyone's gonna buy a MacBook Air, but they want to be fascinated by the diamonds, basically, that it kind of represents, this shiny object. So Fraga was talking about that this is not like the peak of technology and like the discourse on technology, because that is actually what's central there is not the solution of tech, but actually the problem of tech, and like how, like, we have a problem and we have tech, so we can solve it with tech, but then other problems will emerge. I think this is also what you see, like, in the open AI ideology. These people who are doing the marketing for that, they're talking about, oh yeah, AI will give us more fulfilling lives. Now, when I watch it, I'm sitting there like, what the fuck? I was so flabbergasted. Like, how can you actually believe it? Like, Jesus
Yeah.
Yeah.
Christ, it's like, fucking
It's
hell.
trying to overcome the gap. It's trying to overcome the gap, you know?
Yeah, it's so disembodied. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
It serves I love the quote. The spirit of these redeemers consisted of gaps, but into every gap they had plugged a delusion, their stopgap, whom they named God.
Where's that?
I have a different translation, but this one is on this one's on the priests section.
Mm.
Um,
It's sort of like outsourcing. It's like the ultimate. This is the ultimate thing that the last man would do, or the fucking rabble would do. They want to outsource. They want to outsource their fucking own spiritual development. Oh,
they want to I think you nailed it when you said they want to like externalize. For me, it has something to do with externalizing their discomfort. Like, there's, you know, he in Chogyam Trungpa, who's this Buddhist guy, he talks about genuine compassion versus idiot compassion, and I think that could be compared to Nietzsche's kind of like pitying. It comes from an internal discomfort that you want to sort of expiate or alleviate, and so it's motivated not by like a genuine care for the other, but rather how the other's mental, physical, emotional state is making you uncomfortable.
I mean,
and I
you
think
can see in the future with Neuralink, you'll have it download an app, compassionate app, you know, or I mean, another example is, did you see the video online on YouTube of the narcissists and BLM, where you have all of all of these predominantly, like, you know, women doing the the influencer thing where they get their boyfriends to take the picture of the BLM, but then they just get back into the car. It's not real compassion. It's just
yeah,
it's
exactly.
just for Instagram.
Right. Yeah. I think, yeah. And I just one more quick thing. I think like this, the gap, for playing with this idea of the gap as sort of it can lead to a kind of internal discomfort, but simultaneously also can be a sort of creative reservoir. So I think the gap's an important, for me, the gap's an important place to look. And I think the opposite of this sort of externalizing discomfort or whatever is a kind of like internal reflection, so it's like the question is maybe not, oh, how should you treat the rabble or relate to the rabble, but like why does that make you feel disgust, or why do Nietzsche says, I felt shame for his shame, like why do I feel shame for this? Like I think there's just approaching life in that way is radically, I find it's very difficult and radically different from sort of the normal operating mode of the ego, which is really to just sort of deflect discomfort. And I think maybe smuggled into like the priest's outlook is that is trying to cover up a kind of basic inequality or a basic suffering, a suffering and inequality that exists within the gap that maybe to a certain degree will never be able to be overcome. So there's sort of like a metaphysical lack of acceptance of that, which then kind of creates
resentment.
Yeah,
I think
that it shouldn't be this way. This is, it shouldn't be this way. We, yeah.
They can't accept their own, as you say, lack. So they have to externalize.
Yep. Exactly.
On somebody else. Yeah.
Just I think a passage from the prologue that I think kind of highlights, or is a good way to see clearly what you guys are all talking about there, is when he comes down from the mountain and then he goes and he tries to preach the overman to this people in the marketplace. And then what do they want? They say, give me the last man, give me the last man. Now, what Zarathustra does is says, oh, they just want me to give them something. They want to let me to insource my wisdom to them with just for free and give them just comfort of this last man concept. Well, he doesn't want to do that, so that's why he's not a priest. You could imagine that someone else in that situation that sees, oh, this rabble's hungry for this last man. I know how I can like take advantage of that. I can come up with an app that will make them more comfortable, and kind of colonize on that tendency of the rabble to want to outsource itself. So the rabble is like, in that sense, like this ground that's constantly being manipulated by the priests and things like that are, going back to your vampire metaphor. They say, well, these people are willing to kind of give me their energy and money and et cetera, as long as I fill them with something comfortable and easy. Zarathustra obviously doesn't want to do that.
So Zarathustra is playing a sort of Christ-like archetype here. He's being, in a way, sacrificial.
Say more about what you mean.
I mean, he's not just coming down and sort of getting involved in manipulation in the same way that the priests would, and manipulating the herd, but he's genuinely putting himself in harm's way to cultivate a following that will be life affirming and having disciples, but non-disciples in a sense. And I do see in Jesus, not Christianity or Pauline aspect, but there does seem to be a similarity here between Zarathustra Socrates in a sense that, I'm just going to come down in here and say what I'm going to say, and if people are going to throw stones at me, so be it.
Okay, Max, do you think that Zarathustra would have, like, let's say it wasn't Socrates in that epoch of history, but Zarathustra was there, and eventually he would have to drink the cup of poison. Do you think he would have done it?
Whew. It's a big question. That's a very good one.
What would he have done?
I don't know. I think you could make arguments for several aspects. I have a sneaking suspicion that Zarathustra. God, this is a brilliant question, Dimitri. Okay? Let's do both sides, right? Let's say he will drink the hemlock. I think Zarathustra would turn that example of drinking the hemlock as being symbolic of the history of Western philosophy. And he even says this, I can't pull out the quote at the moment, but the persecution of the heretic and the philosopher throughout history. So you could say that, look, this is the price that a philosopher may have to pay, and this is what my whole paper is about. A philosopher, Foucault talks about this in Phrasia, fearless speech, speaking truth to power. But this is the game, the ultimate game of a philosopher, to speak freely, to have a freedom for something, to walk the tightrope. That's one explanation. Another explanation, you could say, well, Zarathustra could just say, I don't believe in the laws that you put down, and have a sort of anarchistic teaching that the philosophers and the heretics and the noblemen should try and subvert the laws of the rabble and become more cunning. I don't know, which do you think is more plausible?
So yeah, let's say Zarathustra in chapter 1, instead of being asked to leave the city, he's taken up by the guards and he has to drink the cup, and he's put into prison, and there's coming this friend who's like, hey man, I can save you, like in the Crito,
Yes. Yeah.
He's like, hey man, I can save you, I've got a boat, we can leave the place. I think Socrates there says some things that aren't really Nietzschean. I think Zarathustra would have, I think he would have fled, honestly. He wouldn't have held up the morality of the rebel to ossify its morality. He would have been like, okay, I'm beyond good and evil. Why do I care about their idea of justice? I'm just gonna leave. Maybe that's.
But I don't think that
you could think about it.
Again, I think it's how you read it. But I also think that Zarathustra could use that, arresting and being sentenced, as an indictment of the rabble. Look, this is what Plato did with the Republic. He was so incensed that Socrates was sentenced to death that he made his whole Republic as a repudiation of the rabble's governance. That's why he wanted to have a philosopher kings. The rabble killed a man to the stature of Socrates, to the stature of Zarathustra. They don't deserve to be governing. Philosophers do. And until that day that they do govern, humanity is cursed.
Well, is it really that? Okay, that's Plato. In Nietzsche, it's different. In Nietzsche, even like Adele also says, he is not. Will to power is not about like ruling over others. It's about how are you going to put your own life on the line for your highest hope, and like kind of kill yourself in that sense,
Sure.
like your current identity.
Wasn't Socrates like, right before he was arrested, like demanding that the state, like take care of him so he could continue to be, the gadfly or whatever. Like, wasn't he, am I wrong there? Like, that was a part of it, like that he was, I guess he was putting his life on the line there. Like, I offer you this service of, telling you where you're fucking up, and then, then sentenced to death after that. But
Well, I think you could go back to the talk about the blood stuff again, where what's the difference between Zarathustra and Jesus? Well, Jesus, whatever you think of him, was used by the priests. His blood was an example of being used by the priests. I'm not sure Zarathustra would want to replicate that. He wants to write in his own blood. He doesn't want to be written, to be used by someone else as a tool in that sense. I think then going to what you said, Max, about like, if the in Plato and if the rabble rules like this, then they don't deserve to rule. The philosophers deserve to rule, maybe, but it also might be what Zarathustra is saying is, let them rule in their realm, and then I'll go to the mountains and rule in another realm. What we should protect against is allowing like this all to become one homogeneous realm. Like,
but the problem is that if they impose their will on Zarathustra, preventing him from doing that, if as Dimitri says, he's in the prison, the only way that he can actually get out is, breaking their law. And if it depends on if Zarathustra has that opportunity. If he has the opportunity, well, we'll have to see. But if he doesn't have the opportunity, what can he do? He can only make an example of the issue.
That's a great point, but I think part of the answer is, he wouldn't put himself in the situation to be like that. Whereas Socrates is very much like in the city, talking to the people and attempting to kind of change the governance structure in a sense. I know that he wasn't necessarily political in that way, but he was. But it's I think Zarathustra's advice might be, well, you should have done what I did when I went into the marketplace. I found out that when you talk to the people, you're going to be confused, and eventually you probably will find yourself in a situation where someone's going to poison you. But it's so if you don't want that, then go elsewhere.
But it's only a level of intensity, as you say yourself. Zarathustra did try, and he took the other path. I mean, maybe Socrates was a bit too. He wasn't as.
Well, I think the other thing that I was going to say about a little bit different point to that, but there was something in the book that we read today. He talks about, I've died 1,000 deaths. Usually I would interpret that with like kind of psychologically, he's, within this lifetime of his, he's had to overcome himself in many ways. But there is a possibility of reading that again. Why did he select Zarathustra? Part of it was, right, like Zarathustra was one of.
What were you going to say, Dimitri?
Yeah, well, we touched upon it in this conversation a bit, and that's this like what Quinn pointed at with this democratization. What is this kind of will that people want everyone to have a vote, and Bart has these ideas about the cult of transparency and the Bard absolute. He says that if we have a culture, it has to. It has to have a Sutra and Tantra divide, it has to be like, you have to have people who do certain things which others won't touch. And like the subtitle to the book is A Book for None and All. And this is such an interesting title because, okay, in what sense is it for all? It's a sense that like everyone kind of would perhaps maybe like help themselves in a spiritual way by reading this book. They could go through deep self-reflections, but it's none because it's like
can everybody? I don't know. I don't know.
That's why it's none. that's it. It's for all and none, because no one can actually go to the end with this. I don't think so. Well, maybe I don't know. Maybe like absolute knowing is this kind of state, but
But that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm pointing about the democratization.
like yeah, because
Is it
like,
is it really possible that everybody can? I don't believe that.
no, I the same. I think I think Bart is basically right that this you really shouldn't have this cult of transparency. You know, like this idea that because the Tarantula, I read them as the communist. You know, in the communist newspapers of their party, it was always called Pravda, like truth, die Wahrheit. It was about getting all the truth out to the masses immediately from the party newspaper, and that's just not gonna work. It just doesn't work.
Just to finish the point before I dropped off the call, is that I think there you could read this as selecting Zarathustra and saying, okay, this is a person who maybe, to borrow the concept of reincarnation, maybe he did come as Socrates, did come as Jesus, did come as these things. Now he's coming as Zarathustra, and he's saying Socrates might have made a few mistakes that we shouldn't repeat, and Jesus may have done the same. Maybe let's try something else.
I do think the idea of, the quote that we have of the child in the mirror and looking in the devil. I mean, you could say that of Jesus too, that Jesus had a message and his message was distorted just like Zarathustra's could be. But yeah, any other general thoughts, guys, before we wind it up?
Just that if you're thinking again Greeks and stuff, we read the Isles of the Blessed chapter today. Again here, I think he's talking about this image of these islands that are away from the normal landmass. Like, I think a really big thing I think Nietzsche wants us to think about is like to be careful of thinking about the world, like the world as one place that needs to have one rule and one system for all.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's a good point. I think that it would be interesting to think Nietzsche as a thinker of differentiation and the necessity, as well as the beauty of differentiation, because I think many, spiritual practices or philosophical ways, many ways that people think is they think towards unity and towards this oneness, and they want to get rid of the differentiation in the past, and they want to get rid of it in the future by picture thought and screen memories. So yeah, that's like Nietzsche is a thinker of differentiation not only in the past but also the future and the actuality. That's something very interesting to explore more deeply.
Yeah, I guess kind of connected to what a lot of you guys are saying. I think, in the prologue, the fact that he, after going to the marketplace, concludes that these must not be the right ears for my message, and not, oh, how can I shift my message to be sort of applicable to these ears, which I feel like that's
a good point.
Kind of a lesson in this, is that I feel like in the spiritual marketplace now too, there's more the impetus to dilute a message or color it and paint it in a particular way so that it can be digestible by everybody, and everybody can be meditating for 15 minutes a day, and then we'll all be 15% happier. I think that impetus just pollutes a lot of this kind of discourse. And Nietzsche's like, all right, he's not gonna diminish his own message or change it in any particular way, but rather find some people, find the others, you know.
So, Quinn, why do you think that Nietzsche obviously is really about being shameless in your pursuit of excellence, and he doesn't fall in this trap of I have to please the many? Why do you think people desire this quantity of followers, and what is that? Like to have everyone, to have everything accessible for everyone. Why is that desirable?
Yeah, I mean that's a big question. I mean part of it I think is like, I mean, I guess that's, man, I'm gonna have to think on this. I think on one level we, you know, there's the maybe fallacy that if the message gets out to more people, you know, like the sort of measuring the value of a message based on sort of the quantity of its impact, you know, or measuring the quality of a particular song or book or something simply on, you know, the amount of downloads it has or the amount of copies that have been sold or the amount of ears that listen, you know. I think that can be a dangerous route, you know. And then I think the other part is, I think this value of democratization, I feel super embedded in our society. It's that, you know, if you have a good message, you want to get it out as far and as wide as possible. You know, like the sort of, you know, Buddhism and mindfulness fell prey to this, you know, I think very disastrously. And I think it goes well with the market too. You know, it's sort of like, okay, how can we condense and package the message so that it's just like really palatable, really sort of diluted, and then can be mass replicated.
Yeah,
I think information often follows that pattern, you know, travels in that manner, you know, more condensed and sort of a more diluted message will travel faster. And also I think fundamentally it's like the discomfort thing, you know. It's like you know, meditation went from like this deep self-inquiry, you know, confronting the discomfort and the shame within, to like, oh, well, if I meditate for 15 minutes, I'll feel a little happier and a little less stressed. Like, that's like, whoa.
yeah, that's there's these on YouTube. There's this genre. It's like lifestyle videos, and there's, you know, it's basically people filming at their workplace, at their home, and showing like, this is how I live. Obviously they want to show off like, hey, this is cool, right? I'm upholding the picture, right? And then all in the comments are always flooded by, oh my god, this lifestyle is amazing, it's so cool. And it's it's kind of nice that for these people, it's they can just put up a video like that. Obviously they aren't comfortable with themselves in their life, that's why they even put up something like this. But there's so many comments and they all justify their actions. So it's a nice way to stop thinking like it would be harder for someone like this, that to have a friend who you must hate, because then you have someone who you want recognition from, but can actually tell you the truth as well, uh, if that makes sense.
I think I'm following you there. I may have missed a bit of that.
Yeah, no, it's about like like Nietzsche talks about like neighbors and friendship, and you can have very few friends who you want recognition from, or like kind of dampen this like intense and intimate dimension by going towards the quantity.
Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
this is René Guénon. This is the reign of quantity, of equality.
The reign of quantity. Yeah, I like that.
The crisis of modernity, the reign of quantity, utilitarian thinking, mass society is good, not quality is good. And also these famous philosophers are the famous philosophers of the rebel.
These are the false idols that the rabble put up on their TV. I mean, you will know more about this, Dimitri, than I will, but I think that this is a really fundamental question for the philosophers that are going to come on the scene now. I mean, people like us, because we are living in the attention information age. So, you know, you have whole algorithms built on this, and you know. You're gonna say
that's a great point. I feel like the informational age is killing the myth of quantity. You know, it's sort of like I think there's a growing realization that more is, you know, just more quantity is definitely not superior to like the quality.
But how do we as philosophers, if we're going to have, like Zarathustra, a message project to do, how do we not get captured?
I think, okay, I have a real life example. I was talking about this with George recently. There's this philosopher, I was following him when he had like 50 subscribers on YouTube, and I enjoyed talking with him, and he's like a Zizekian philosopher. And now I didn't talk for him in a long time, and then George sent me a video of him, and now he has 100,000 followers on Instagram. And he's making these 5-second TikTok videos where he's like, what is love? Love is when you have this deep feeling of, you know, like the wise man's 40 thoughts bullshit. So I don't think we should create content for TikTok anytime soon. I think, you know, it's about the medium is the message, and should have like long, deep readings and talking deeply and taking the time. And I think,
Right.
it's really about taking the time and not just getting it out there or something.
So
I think going back to I'm sorry, I forgot who brought that up, but the thing about the nobility and the aristocracy, you know, part of what Nietzsche liked about that, I think, was that there were princes, there were philosophers, there were people who were funded by someone and had the time to do something else. You know, when you then equalize society and you get rid of that structure, now everybody has to kind of go to the money well. Like, and I think part of Nietzsche's response to that isn't, oh, okay, well, what we need to do is set back up like the old nobility where, you know, you're now a rich prince again. But what his response is no, like there's kind of like a noble poverty where it's like, nope, I don't have 500,000 followers on TikTok. I'm not bothered that someone does, but I'm not going to seek it. Like try to create conditions for yourself where you're, you know, it's never going to be possible to be like 100% independent of, you know, so to speak, the rabble, where, you know, unless you're going to go be a self-sufficient farmer somewhere or something. But as much as possible, don't make yourself dependent on that game. I think, I don't know, that's a takeaway I tend to see in him, is like, you know, this selected kind of poverty of like, I will again, I'll build my own garden and space for that, and anyone who wants to come to this mountain of mine, you're welcome here. But I'm just not going to play the same game as everyone else. I'm so much not going to play it that I'm not even going to try to meddle with your ability to continue playing.
yeah, I think you're correct. I think the fundamental question, though, is what does Zarathustra do, or what does the philosopher do when he has to engage with the rabble? I mean, does he have to engage with them? I mean, there is this sort of tension.
Yeah, you have to engage with them if you're not living in a monastery every day, bro.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, even to reach your other fellow thinkers, you have to put your face out there.
Yeah.
I mean, we wouldn't be in Cadell's course if Cadell wasn't on YouTube. So, I mean, also this idea of fame. I mean, his fame in, I don't know. Nietzsche does seem to come down a lot on the famous philosopher, but if Cadell overnight or Bard became famous overnight, I think it's how you handle it and
Right,
how
like would
you.
their message change? I mean, I think that's what Matt, right? Like, are they still true to whatever their creative will and intention are? Are they
I'm
making 5
yeah.
second TikTok videos? That's pretty telling.
I mean, I immediately thought of Peterson and his whole meteoric hard thing to balance. I mean, being famous, being a philosopher.
I think that's a genuine question. It's like, can you actually sort of hit that level of fame and recognition and not have it affect you? Like,
Well, this is what happened to Foucault and Deleuze. I mean, they were really rock stars in their time. Really, like I mean, even Zizek nowadays.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean,
Zizek is a great example of someone who didn't succumb.
well, do you really think he didn't? Do you think it
Okay,
didn't affect him
well,
at all?
actually, I would say that he didn't succumb in his deep, like metaphysical philosophy. So I think less than nothing, uh, the field sex and field absolute, like these are extremely deep books. They don't
Yeah.
appeal to the rebel at all. But then he also released this book called "A Left That Dares to Speak Its Name," and Zizek has this kind of as this communist. For some reason, he still calls himself a communist and thinks there's something there, which he's not totally wrong about. But yeah, no, I think Zizek is a good example.
Well, I think part of Zarathustra's answer to Max's question about, it is inevitable that you will interact in some way or with the rabble. I think part of his answer is like, in those images when he's like, okay, my fruit is ripe on the tree, I allow anyone to pluck it. So it's like if someone from the rabble comes across his fruit, he's not going to stop them from doing whatever they will with it. It's impossible to do that. I think there's more. So I think it's kind of like the way I kind of think he treats like the rabble and that type of thing is more like that thing's going to do what it's going to do, and it's going to have all these weird side effects and things are going to happen. And I allow in the same way that he's like, oh, I'll allow myself to be deceived. Well, to some extent, I think he says, I'll allow myself to be misinterpreted. But what I'm not going to do is like cater my message towards that. I'm not going to try to play in that field. Nevertheless, I know that like in the long run, it's going to be, it's going to fall into the hands of people who weren't the ears that I intended it for. Like he's going to try to put some protections against that. He's like, I'm going to try to make it very clear. This book isn't for everybody, that you don't have to read it. And in fact, maybe be careful of reading it, etc. But some people are still going to do it. And if they do, and they find some fruit on my tree, then enjoy, but I'm not going to be planting my tree like and gardening it in a way that's like for the rabble, if that makes sense.
So basically you're reading him in a sort of way that just don't tread on my, I'll be over here doing my own thing.
More like I'm going to be over here doing my own thing. And I don't know, my own thing is maybe a exaggerated way of saying that, but yeah, like kind of, I see him as saying, I'm going to be concerned with my questions. I'm going to be concerned with my destiny, my fate, my like all these things that are interesting to me. I'm going to pursue that. And, I'm not going to worry so much about, what happens to it when it gets in the hands of other people, because you can't control all of that. Like at the end of the day, you might say something that you thought was extremely clear and lucid and brilliant, and and perfectly stated, and then someone reads it and they just are either accidentally misinterpret it just because they didn't get it, or they're a priest and they see something powerful in it and they intentionally misuse it.
I agree with you to a certain degree, but I don't see Zarathustra as being that passive. I mean, I've said this one before about my enemies. I mean, in certain passages, he is going to war. It's not just a sort of,
yeah. I know what you mean, but I think the way I would say it differently than that, I think he's not passive. He's active. But what I think I'm trying to say, and the way I think he would sort of phrase it, is he doesn't want to be reactive. He doesn't want to say, okay, here's the rabble morality. Here's what everyone else is doing. Therefore, I'm going to adjust based on what they're doing. No, he's going to say, okay, I have my own activity, and I will do my activity. And then, yes, there will be reactions to that activity, but does that make sense as a difference?
No, I agree with you. I agree. There's a sort of, as he says, my own lake within inside me. Yes, I agree with you that there's a sort of healthy self-centeredness instead of an externalization that we see with the rabble. But and I agree that in theory, and I think that can be an ethic in itself. But I mean, is it really possible to be like that? I mean, if he's going to go to war, that's based on reaction.
I'm not sure war is based on reaction necessarily. He might go to war for something. Again, you mentioned earlier freedom for versus freedom from. He may go to war in the sense of I'm going to create something. But I forgot there was another thing I was going to say to what you just said. Sorry, lost it. If it comes back to me, I'll let you know.
Any thoughts, George? Pretty quiet.
What about James? Do you have any thoughts?
Well, I really was enjoying just sort of listening to everyone just unpacking all of this, and I think I really agree with the sentiment about like that this is an active force that is going to encounter reactive ones, and instead of sort of substituting or changing the tactic, it's going to just stay active, no matter what. And that's I think that's a very Nietzschean point, that there's always going to be these reactive forces that are changing acting upon active forces, causing them to disintegrate in some way. So I think that's where I'm working through this too with all of you, and I like I appreciate the deeper reading, and I think it's nice to get away from from all the bite-sized stuff. It's like that you could probably spend all day just sort of getting at the 40 thoughts, right? All the overcomings and all that shit, but the game is probably to stay with the contradiction and to stay with the stay in the discomfort, and there's an enjoyment that comes.
I agree. Welcome, Fidel. Feel free to.
Yeah, when I'm reading Nietzsche, there's always these weird sentences which you don't understand, and then sometimes you try to reread them, and it's actually extremely insightful, and sometimes it seems to like you just can't get the meaning of it. So that's so interesting about this book. You can just there's so much reread value, and also to talk about it. You know, every time people come up with so many different perspectives in our conversation.
Just on this idea of active and reactive, this is a big aspect of the two sort of spirits that we've been talking about. Zarathustra comes down to the village of the pied cow and wants to have his message, which we've said is different to how the priests spread their message, that there's a sort of overflowing in Zarathustra. But Zarathustra, in his activeness and wanting to show people the way, was reactive to the rabble. So when we say that Zarathustra is just active, is he not also reactive? I mean, do we not have to clarify?
I don't think it would be right to say that Zarathustra is only active.
Right.
I would
But that's
say
what some people are saying.
you could. I think going back to where we were talking earlier about the disgust for the rabble, you know, he kind of frames that as like his one of his biggest dangers for him, right? Is this disgust he has for the rabble. And again, I think he's going to try to overcome that. But I think you could say disgust is a kind of reactive feeling, right? It's you don't just feel disgust for something. Like you don't just actively go out in the world and you have this kind of disgust. Like you have to come across, that has to be prompted by something. And so I think again there, I think a big part of what Zarathustra is about is, yeah, there's a lot of things about him that are reactive, but at the end of the day, I think what he's trying to get to, or back to, you might say, is activity, like his own activity. He's trying to say, okay, I'm being tempted to be reactive. I nearly became reactive like everyone else. I nearly became disgusted. And I think he's really warning against that.
Okay, so there seems to be then. Go on, Quinn. Do you want to say?
Just just a small point on that. I think part of what he encounters in his journey of bringing his message down is that he encounters a lot of contradictions and problems and issues. And I think an important movement is the movement back into solitude. And I think one way I read that is he is trying to cultivate a kind of relationship to the inner abyss or the void, or however you want to language it. And from that wellspring, that's where it feels like it's more active. It's not that there isn't reactive aspects, but it's almost like as he notices himself maybe becoming reactive, it's sort of a clue to maybe go back into a state of solitude and work through that kind of that reactive impulse to reconnect with the purity of kind of the vision.
So you're both saying, yeah, you might have to have some strategic aspects of being reactive, as we were talking about with Socrates, that his message, really isn't going to hit the rabble, but Zarathustra was more aware and said the rabble just won't listen, so I'm going to have to change tack. But it's less about the reactive. Okay, let me just say that. Is it less about the active and reactive posture itself and more about the source of the reactive and active posture?
The what? Can you say that last part again?
It seems to be less about this idea of active or reactive posture, but more about the source and the working through of that posture.
Yeah, I think what's that's very interesting to explore, because there's all these enemies in your life, but Zarathustra keeps emphasizing that you have to try to find your best enemy, and that this enemy is yourself, actually. And so I think that yeah, you know, like you can say active. There's also reactive, but there's also passive and abreactive. So
Right.
there's
Very
also
good.
response. I don't think it's reacting to something is necessarily bad. You know, it you could reflect the other back to themselves by reacting in a certain theatrical way, like Zarathustra does. But yeah, I also think, yeah, it's important not to get caught up in that, and because there can be a lot of noise coming through with something like this.
So what is different? I mean, Zarathustra, if I'm correct, there was this quote that I had a while ago where he was talking about the rabble. And let me just see if I can get it. He says, rabble want to sort of pull out the eyes of their enemy. They're just sort of so motivated by revenge and what is the quality that Zarathustra has by turning inward? What has he found in his inner lakes or his reservoir that allow him not to be like the rabble?
I think that's what Cadell's getting at with the signal and the noise, is that in solitude there's not gonna be a lot of distractions.
No.
But the signal's high, but this can be like either very painful or excessively like ecstatic. So when you learn to be with that on your own,
Yeah.
you know, like when you're on your own, you don't have anyone to react to, only yourself. Like you can kind of uh, like beat yourself over with something, but you have to learn to be with that as well eventually. You know, like that's that's
What
what it seems like to
It
me.
also feels like he sort of cherishes his worst enemy, rather than
Yeah,
resent them.
I
And
agree.
maybe resentment is rhetorical. Something that we can agree on or something, right? Something that we find something we can all, we can relate to each other through our resentment. So, like, oh, we resent this other
Ah,
or
yeah.
something, and then it's, and that's how it's there's a pleasure that we get out of it. Whereas if we can cherish being, having an enemy or something like that, there's actually enjoyment that you would get from um, you can still be enthusiastic about your life, about your struggles and things, because you have this great enemy. You should, you cherish
Yeah,
that. You adore them.
And fling your
he's
like he says, you can throw your spear finally when the enemy is coming, and you
yeah.
can
Yeah, hooray.
yourself. You can prove yourself with your greatest battle in that sense.
Oh,
He says it here in The Virtuous. He says, all the secrets of your heart shall be brought to light, and when you lie, grubbed up and broken in the sunlight, then your falsehoods will be separated from your truth. For this is your truth. You are too pure for the dirt of the words revenge, punishment, reward, retribution. You love your virtue as the mother her child, but when was it heard of a mother wanting to be paid for her love? Your virtue is your dearest self. The ring's desire is in you to attain it again itself. Every ring struggles and turns itself to that end. And every work of your virtue is like a star extinguished. Its light is forever traveling. And when will it cease from traveling? Thus, the light of your virtue is still traveling even when the task is done. So, in this is in the virtue. So, I mean, do we have to sort of? He goes on to talk about and others are proud of their handful of righteousness, and for its sake commit wanton outrage upon all things, so that the world is drowned in their unrighteousness. Alas, how ill the word virtue sounds in their mouth. And when they say it, I am just, it always sounds like I am revenged. They want to scratch out the eyes of their enemies with their virtue, and they raise themselves only in order to lower others. So there's a sort of,
Well, in the genealogy of morals, just to to bring that in, Nietzsche like quotes Aquinas, and Aquinas saying that those in heaven will see everyone burning in hell, and that'll make heaven more pleasurable to them. And so I think that's the so there's that virtue signaling, that you're
yes,
that you actually what you think your virtue is really is resentment, and that's again probably more of a rhetorical point, that you're finding you're preying on what people their weakness, what they want. You want this, you want to see someone else suffer, it'll make you feel better or whatever.
so what is it in solitude that will solve this problem? If I'm correct, when we were reading Hegel was much more, was he skeptical of solitude? You seem to be much more sort of in the world, but Zarathustra seemed to be,
I think Hegel would he was definitely I don't know about critical, but it's sort of the stage of like the monk or the stoic or like the beautiful
yes,
soul in the chapter
exactly,
on spirit, is that
exactly,
his spirit can become so sort of in love with its own, I think he says, transparent unity, that the spirit doesn't want to go out into the town square and become tarnished or become triggered or become reactive in any way. And I think Nietzsche would, I think he's right there too in exploring the dialectic between the two. And I think that's where the love for your enemies come in. It's like, if you're at this, if you're a beautiful soul just meditating and in this state of bliss, the self-contemplation of the divine, it's like, yeah, then maybe it's go out and love your enemies and pick the hardest fight and go out and challenge the sort of inner unity to see what it can take.
so
But
go on,
yeah, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just this dialectic between like solitude and kind of interacting with others in this way. For me, it's a very intimate one. Even that experience I was sharing when I went from a period of solitude for about a week and a half, and I felt so overjoyed, and I felt like sort of nothing could sort of take me down from this overflowing joy. I was so humbled and surprised by how quickly
Yes,
just the little bit of tension or interpersonal discomfort totally sort of expelled me from that state, and shame. It just, that's a big one that I keep coming back to. It's
I agree.
to me that's where it's like, once, as soon as I felt that discomfort, then I wanted to start organizing myself and what I was saying in order to be perceived in a certain way by the other person, and I think that's how I'm very sort of phenomenological and personal level see the reactive. It's like, oh, suddenly I'm organizing myself in reaction to the environment, in reaction to, and it's not like I'm saying I just want to be fucking ruthless and an asshole and not be considerate of other people, but there's it was clear in that moment for me. I was like, oh, okay, no, I immediately wanted to go back into solitude and reconnect with that space, and work not to like, and I think that there it's like, are you escaping that discomfort, or are you like, oh, I need the container of solitude to work through that shame. I think there's the possibility where it's just escapism, but I also think there's the possibility in which the solitude is there's the absence of noise allows for you to sort of inquire into that.
So I think what you're saying is really important. So we have this dialectic between solitude and interacting socially. And the key is, how do we do both? So if you're in solitude, and Nietzsche has this even in the genealogy. And why are you going into solitude? Are you going in just to ascetic and to escape from the world, or are you actually going in to meet yourself there? And then you do see this as well. I mean, Nietzsche is saying in Zarathustra, okay, he's championing solitude, but yet he is actually out there trying to find fellow people like him. So, and then in regards to the point that you're saying, Quinn, we have this solitude where you were comfortable in, but so the solitude, what is the point of solitude? Is it to go away, be happy? Is it to go away and sort of really test yourself? And then when around people, I find sometimes that it's just better to put on a sort of a mask, with some people that I know that they don't really want to talk to Max. It would be too much for them to really talk to Max. And it's better if I just give them the appearance of who they want.
Oh, who you think that they
want. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, it's fucking obscene, man. It's so weird.
Well, I think the cup, filling up your cup in solitude, and then the dialectic with that of then going back out into the world and pouring your cup back out. But then I think what he's, be careful with where you pour it out, especially early on in your own path. If you have to expect reactivity is going to come. So in that sense, I think that's why he's like, it's okay to have enemies. It's good to have enemies, but find the good ones, so that when you, because it's inevitable that when you bring activity into the world, it's going to cause reactions, and eventually the activity that you built up is going to get dissipated. Like, don't just go throwing it around willy-nilly.
Yeah,
like
sure.
I think that's where I go with it. And just to think of the cup right there, the full cup versus the unfull cup, that's kind of that back forth shift between the two states of the active. I would sort of think of it, the active, the building up of the active, and then the use of the active.
Mm-hmm. Any thoughts, Quinn?
Yeah, I mean that's I agree with that. I think that was really well said, Brendan. Yeah, for me, it was when I was younger. I had an experience where I just I realized that I did not enjoy my own company. Like I was, I was very extroverted and I loved being social, but I just had this recognition that I think a large part of why I enjoyed being social so much was to dispel this sort of discomfort in the that I experienced in solitude. So that was kind of the first movement for me towards solitude. It was just like learn to love your own company. Learn to fill your cup up, as Brendan was saying, or James. And then I think that's another good point. It's like you can be maybe at first, be a little wary of where you share that, who you share that drink with, when your cup's full. Who are you gonna go and share that with? Probably someone who has another full cup, maybe of their own solitude, so that they're not trying to suck yours dry. Maybe at least in the beginning. I don't know.
Yeah, but then also, if you do trust into the build up or the filling up of that cup aspect of that, then also not being totally devastated when you go out and you pour out your cup and it gets
Don't
dissipated.
Be stingy.
Like,
don't be stingy with it.
Like that well still exists. Just go back to the well and get more. Like,
right,
it is
right,
okay.
right, exactly.
Like,
yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think Nietzsche would absolutely say that. Yeah, his if it's an eternal reservoir, an eternal wellspring, that cup will, it will never run dry.
But that does make it interesting. What is that wellspring? Like, is it an eternal wellspring? What I think Max was trying to ask that a little bit too. Like what is this well?
Mm. Yeah. I mean, is it, can you create it? I mean, this comes in with the whole democratization thing. Is it, I mean, I can go back to my sort of falling into philosophy. I mean, I didn't, philosophy chose me, I think. I remember just doing it in college once, and I was so bad academically. I never thought I could do it, but I just fell in love with it and said, okay, I'm going to do it. But, and then actually going to college and seeing people and how they interacted with philosophy in college, it was, you're not really doing philosophy, you're doing something else. You're not, you know, this isn't sort of ripping your soul apart. So is it that this lake is something that is just given to some people as a sort of gift? Is it something that can be cultivated? Can it actually run out? I think you can be sort of ground down by life, and it can make it barren.
Yeah,
I think
it's a deep question. Oh, go ahead, James.
I was just gonna say I think it's somewhere it might be in the beginning, but then you know, later on it gets repeated. Like you have to be you know, you have to be an ocean to take in a polluted stream. And so you know, I'm gonna show him an ocean he can drown himself in. You know, like I think he says this maybe to the priest or something like that. And so maybe it's just like it's a recognizing, you know, who you are, that you are this, I mean, perhaps it can be cultivated, or maybe, or maybe it's just sort of that you know, you are that, and then you recognize it. You know, maybe some people are more polluted streams and some people are oceans, some people are like little puddles or something. I don't know, but
I'm just
but certainly like the metaphor is really beautiful, I think. So
yeah,
I'm glad you said metaphor, because it's something I think is worth thinking about. Is, you know, there's a lot of metaphor obviously in Zarathustra, but how much of it is like, how much is it metaphor, and how much did, like, you know, when he talks about the dream of the child and the mirror and the devil's face, or other dreams in it, did he like actually have these dreams? Like, how much of this is like he's really mining his own dreams, his own experience as that well? Like I can't remember where he says it in the book, but somewhere he says something like, he uses the phrase metaphor and more than a metaphor, and like that phrase always intrigued me, because it's like, yeah, there is, like, anybody could like make a comparison between life and a tree, any given tree, right? But what about the particular tree you saw in your strange dreams, Zarathustra? Is that what we're getting from him, is like literal visions?
Well, this
I guess we'll never know.
well, this comes into, go on.
I was just gonna say, I mean, I think like, obviously it's impossible to kind of answer that question, right, Brendan? Because we don't actually know, but it feels like when you're reading it, like the potency of it, it feels like the metaphors are alive in some ways. Yeah. I mean, I would hypothesize that a lot of it is sort of metaphors, you know, if not all of them are metaphors kind of born from his own experience.
That's why I always find myself thinking like how long did it take him to write this thing? You know, it's like, because and where does that come from? Like, it's going back to this wellspring kind of thought. It's like, it, you know, I don't have an answer to that, but it doesn't seem like the type of text that was like, I'm gonna sit down and like structure out this like thing, and then eventually I'll find the right image that matches this concept I'm trying to get across. It seems more like it just came in a flood.
There was two things that are interesting here. So we've been talking about this lake, and then you're bringing up this concept of mining. As we do the process philosophy, as we do this Hegel course or the Nietzsche course, you can actually feel a qualitative change. I can feel it anyway. In my, something's going on. When I was in the, particularly doing the Hegel course, you would have these sort of wild going, oh my God, the shape of my consciousness is changing. And Wittgenstein said this as well. I mean, philosophy is sort of like a therapy. It breaks down concepts that you think are sort of cast in iron or completely, they're you see things that you couldn't see before, and there is a process of doing philosophy that I think creates this well. And if you read George Bataille, who did a lot of work on Nietzsche, he talks a lot about this sort of inner experience, which is similar to what Nietzsche says and talking about in listening to the body. And in relation to the dreams, Dali, what Dali used to do was he would put some keys in his hands, and then he'd go to sleep. And when he was just in the middle of falling to sleep, the keys would drop, and then he would be in this sort of semi-dream-like state, and he would capture the creative ideas from that state and start painting. And I have, like, even last night, I was sort of in between awake and dreaming, and like I got so many ideas. So I would say that this had to come from his own dreaming experience.
So excited that you use that Dali example of holding the keys and allowing that to be like his alarm, to alert him, right, to that, that that's what's happening, right? It's like it's like, how do you know when something's happening? You have to think ahead and and plan for some sort of intervention into the into it, so that way you're alerted to the shifting of things, right? So you're falling asleep and you hear this noise, and you're able to sort of recognize like what's happening in the dream state that you slipped into. But it's I don't know, I love that. It's art lore, right? Artist artist it's the mythology, the mythos of the artist that you like. That, like, I don't know if that actually works. Maybe it does, but it's still fascinating. So
yeah, my dream was very weird. I'm writing this book about a girl who's completely trapped in ideology, and I was there with her, talking to her, just on a beach. And the sun was setting, the sea was completely still, and the sea was in red. So I don't know if it was like blood or if it was just like a red sea. And we were talking, but she hated me, but she loved me. And she understood me, but she didn't understand me. And then down the road, down like a few meters down, I was on another park bench with another character. And then this character, the girl, she went down to the other park bench. She could see me, but she couldn't see the other character that I was talking to. And the whole point of the story is how ideology can blind people. And she couldn't see the other person that I was talking to. It was just a wild way of capturing that in the story in a completely dreamlike state. Fascinating.
This is jumping ahead from the section we read today, but So you guys are talking about Dali, you know, stuff. The dream, I always think, like, if Dali could paint one of Nietzsche's dreams, if he could paint the one that's in the on the three evils, it's opened it up and it says, "My dream, a bold sailor, half ship, half hurricane, reticent as a butterfly, impatient as a falcon. Yet what patience and time it had today for weighing the world." Like, if Dali could paint that, it'd be awesome. And I think part of the reason I would point to that would be, you know, what I like about that image is it's kind of got this image of like half hurricane, half ship. So it's like half structured, half rational, half irrational.
Yeah.
There's something about that I find so common in Nietzsche, is that, like, trying to straddle that line between, he's not irrational in the sense of like, I'm going to throw out reason entirely, but I'm not, my rationality is not closed off to, you know, this imaginative side that doesn't necessarily have that kind of linearly describable structure.
You know who could paint that is Mid-Journey. It's the AI that you prompt and it makes image out of your prompting.
Dolly. Is that the Dolly thing?
Well, it's just it's open source AI, and
Yes,
you
yes.
you just you just give it a prompt like that, like it's half hurricane, half ship, and or whichever order. I mean, I'm sure the order would actually matter, and then the AI would produce an image that is it's just going to be its interpretation of of the prompting of the language. So like I kind of love that. I think like it's sort of it might be the way that Dali would do it too, but it would it's also, there's no way it could be. It's just so fascinating the times we're living in, that we can dream that dream, and then we could ask it. We could ask for it too. And,
what is it? What in regards to this sort of rationality, irrationality? In Plato's, I think it's the Phaedrus or the Symposium, he says that love is sort of like a divine madness. There's some sort of supra-rational element. And Nietzsche seems to be sort of on that same wavelength. What is it about the medium of choosing this extreme imagery, all of this imagery and metaphor? What is in this form of communication compared to Hegel's systematizing, do you think?
I'm not as familiar with Hegel as any of you, I don't think, but to me, it's the Hegel and that type of dialectical thought. That's the ship half of that dream, and then it's maybe lacking to some extent the hurricane half, the half that, like, the human mind is not probably going to be able to, like, put into a kind of clearly imaged framework. But I mean, having said that, like, I think it's important to keep in mind that if we're sticking to that image, that the half ship is in there, like the rational structure is part of it. So it would be too extreme to go to the opposite side and say, nope, Nietzsche's not talking rational. No, he's absolutely talking about trying to have a clear, logical, rational vision, but just something that's couched in a sea of something more than that, I think.
But there's a divine element. I mean, the book is sort of like it's in the same tradition as a sort of religious text or prophetic text. It's not like, here's my proposition. Is it that within the religious, within this sort of, it's the same sort of quality of imagery that you would see with the Bible. Here's Noah's Ark. Here's the two brothers. Is it that it allows for sort of a more expansive interpretation? Well, I suppose Hegel would also allow for an expansive interpretation.
I mean, I guess just how I relate to it personally, for me, metaphors allow for the individual reader to kind of breathe their own life and meaning into it a little bit more than, say, Hegel's phenomenology, in which case he does take you through each shape, and so you can kind of superimpose that onto your life and then kind of make it meaningful for yourself. But I think at least for me, that there's a way in which a metaphor can be a little bit more alive and a little bit more amenable to kind of your own vision and interpretation.
Yeah. So what did we read? So we read today, The Child with the Mirror, The Blissful Islands, The Compassionate, Of the Priests, Of the Virtuous, Of the Rabble, Of the Tarantulas, Of the Famous Philosophers, and Of the Night Song. Was there anything in the, James, you were saying about the Night Song? I was very confused by it. What did you get out of it, or did anybody else get out of it? Anything out of the Night Song?
Well, I get this reaction from, the part where he says, I have a thirst that thirsts for your thirst. It's I was just thinking about, just the nature of desire, and, how desire is always desire of the other. Yeah. And then I think also too, there's this really interesting bit about hurting those who he's bestowed upon, or something to that effect, and that thus I hunger for wickedness. Ice all around me. There's just so many beautiful, again, let's call them metaphors, that I think, and then the sort of the reoccurring, the theme of night, and how at night, there's this almost this, you're overpowered by desire, and you're overpowered by, you're almost overcome with, with this, my hunger comes upon me at night, and, lovers at night, and these sorts of, all these drives, that really, they almost become, you're overwhelmed by them, on a like cyclically or something. It's of the body in some way. And so, I think that's a part of what I get from it. I mean, I think it's just a beautiful poem as well. So I think that's one of my favorite, passages in the book itself. So.
I think it also has, going back a little bit to this conversation about the rabble and all that, where we're saying, well, maybe he, takes this stance that you should go away from the rabble in some sense. You shouldn't necessarily stay there, but that here you see, well, there are going to be effects from that. If there's a part of him that would just like to just give. I mean, that's where, when he goes down into the marketplace and encounters the rabble the first time, he tries to just give them his wisdom. He tries to share with them, and then learns that they're not the ears for this. But that means he's going to have to go back, and there's going to be, these types of feelings in this nightliness of like, if he could, he'd love to just give it to somebody, but can't necessarily do that. So I don't know. I think it's maybe just a little bit of a poem of like, it's sad in that sense of like, but a sadness that, I think has to be kind of incorporated into anyone who wants to do anything like he's talking about. That if you're gonna, be careful about sharing your wisdom and that kind of thing, then there's going to be times where you're like, damn it, I wish I could have talked to somebody about it, but I just knew that I couldn't, or something like along those lines. I think it's an acknowledgement of that yeah, it's not all happiness.
He speaks about longing and stuff. It's it's definitely sad.
Any thoughts, Cadell? Dimitri? Quinn?
Yeah, I mean, echoing what everyone else said, I think.
I have a question. Do you guys think Nietzsche was bipolar?
Yes.
Wouldn't be surprised.
I don't think so, but I don't know. It's possible.
I mean, whatever he was deeply emotionally intelligent. There is a book in Stanford where they have collected a lot of his notebooks around the time of Zarathustra. I haven't read it, but it would be interesting to read them and get a background into a psychology at this time.
I guess I feel like there's all these episodes where Zarathustra is so like upset and sad, like he doesn't eat, he doesn't talk, he doesn't, it's almost I think he doesn't make eye contact. You know what I'm saying? Because this is Nietzsche's mouthpiece. He's speaking through the mouth of Zarathustra, and we've discussed it today too about all these the dreams and stuff. Aren't we just looking through it? Isn't this basically a lot of it contrived? Nietzsche is just contriving these things and talking about it with Zarathustra as the vehicle. And he was a philologist. He knew so much history. He knew so much, probably, mythologies. There's, so many stories that, like, I'm sure that's a part of the material, of the creation of it. But yeah, I think you wouldn't know, about like that sort of level of sadness unless you know about it, probably.
Exactly.
The one reason, and I'm not saying he was a perfectly healthy person, I think he's himself is very obvious about that, even in this book where he's, later on meet him about convalescence and coming back to health and all of that. But I think specifically why I don't know if you guys have ever known someone who was bipolar, but there's so much like agitation and restlessness in a person like that, where I don't know, I just can't, maybe I just haven't met some other types of people who are bipolar, but the ones I known, I just don't think they have like the underlying calm that would be necessary to, put together a project like this.
Like states, like manic states, like there's times when he's flying around, like he's so enthusiastic, he just flies and stuff. So I think there's also there's some allusions to this, like to at least a spectrum of emotion, where you're where things couldn't be any more exciting, and then also it's, I don't know. I think you're right, Brendan. Though, yeah, there's probably, like, you'd have to have some stability you'd have to have some calmness to be able to, sort of like to produce this sort of a work. To produce a work that has, to complete it, I guess. But go ahead, Quinn. Sorry.
Oh no, you're good. Yeah. I think, for me, regardless of whether he was like diagnostically fits the category of being bipolar or not, I think he definitely embraces what, to me, at least in my own experience, is kind of a natural emotional oscillation. so I to me, there is something deeply authentic about sort of leaning into the extreme dialectic of lack and excess, like his sorrow is, as the depths are as high as the heights, and that, I think, he seems to be advocating in some ways for a life of great intensity, which may have some bipolar tendencies to it, to the extent that it's being in an authentic relationship to the real genuine sorrow that it's feeling, and then to the real sort of intensity. And I at least experienced this oscillation in my own life, and I think I've noticed in society there is a pressure to anesthetize that movement, and I think Nietzsche in some ways is sort of like gives permission to lean into that as a natural oscillation of life. And I've found some of my most ecstatic and like joyfully manic periods after periods of sorrow and depression, and I think there's like some sort of, I don't know, Nietzsche kind of makes the whole thing beautiful in some ways. And
I guess
yeah, I don't know if
one
that
other
makes any
thought
sense,
about
but
that, it does make sense, man. But I think it might be worth thinking about how much control, like, for lack of a better word, he has over like kind of deploying this exuberance of his. Like that's the different, the bipolar people I've known, like they kind of like they're kind of imprisoned, if you will, in like their need to go manic. Whereas with Nietzsche, it's like so much of his, a lot of his writing is like, it's polemic, right? It's like he's intentionally exaggerating things. There just seems to be, to me, again, I don't know, I'm not a doctor about psychology or anything, but like there's just a lot of, he's got some yes, he's able to get into exuberant states, but he's also then able to kind of take those states and shape them and mold them and communicate them. I don't know, just the bipolar people I've known, one other thing, they're not very good at communicating. That they, so I've met, great art maybe, but very difficult to for them when they get in a manic state or something like that to communicate anything out of it.
But do you think so? Maybe you can also make the opposite case, in that they are very much in touch with their body and communicating that, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, no, I would just say, I think like so in touch, they're almost fused with that like state. Like if it's a truly manic state or whatever, truly to that degree, where they don't have the option then of like stepping out of that. Whereas I don't know, I could be totally wrong on this, but I just get the sense that like, yeah, he's able to kind of to go there, but I'm not sure that it's a fully there thing, if that makes sense. Like to me, I still feel like there's a gap that remains where yes, he's in that state, but could shift direction a little bit too much, ability to readjust, if that makes sense.
The way I asked bipolar, I didn't just mean to say, oh, like, is he a clinical case? Is he sick or something like that? But there's definitely a bipolarity in Nietzsche.
Could we relate this to like to the tantric versus the sutric sort of frame? Like I think maybe Quinn was talking about like anesthetizing this way of of being. It's not acceptable in the by the rabble, right? Like you can't be so high frequency like amongst everybody. But like if you're really if you could engage with this, then you're pursuing who you are, I suppose, in a tantric way, something like that.
I'd love to just touch on that briefly, because that's kind of for me what's been coming up in my life recently is like thinking, and I think this is maybe like trying to create a tantric container or some kind of container that can handle those kind of radical oscillations. Like, and I don't know, that I feel like Nietzsche is kind of inviting that. It's like, yeah, it's you might, at one moment you might be completely overflowing and kind of manic and kind of absolutely exuberant, and lean into that and share that with others when it's there, and then and then that will maybe sort of exhaust itself at some point, and then there is this genuine sadness, and sort of the Night Song, I think, is a beautiful encapsulation of that sort of mournfulness, and the lack of that excess, and yeah, I don't know, for me, it's I do recognize that maybe there is a risk in like insanity, obviously, like losing your mind when if you can't handle your own self-oscillating intensity. But I think the alternative to just sort of anesthetize and numb yourself and sort of be fearful of that intensity, that just interests me less, I guess. Yeah.
Is it seen as sort of bipolar because he's just honest? I mean, so many people sort of anesthetize themselves and sort of suppress and repress and deny these aspects. I mean, there's a very interesting book, Against Diagnostic Cultures.
Yeah.
It's about this idea, but Tai also explores this in his limit experience idea, and Jaspers in his book on Nietzsche actually plays with this idea of polarity, of going up and down, and the key question in this is, if we have this idea of polarity, of this sort of going up and going down, how do we do it in a way, how do we orientate ourselves now? And I think Nietzsche's trying to work through this. How do we orientate ourselves in regards to becoming and overcoming and polarity and all of this with the traditional value system of Christianity dying? We had in that metaphysical system a sort of clear purity thesis, this sort of closer relationship with God. But now Nietzsche is saying, no, it's actually the values of good and bad are sort of mixed together.
Can you say that last bit again, Max?
That if God is dead, that whole metaphysical system is dead as well. And along with it,
right. And that was sort of and that was kind of a system for handling lack and excess, like an external system for kind of for handling that process.
Yeah, and even that sort of this idea of sort of good and clear bad is sort of all mixed up in one. Nothing is sort of clear cut as we thought it was.
Yeah, man, these are the questions.
There, Quinn.
What'd you say?
You're muted.
Oh, I just said, yeah, these are the questions, man. These are definitely the questions. Of which I have no good answer.
What's your thoughts, Dimitri?
I have some difficulty to focus.
I know, we've been going for a while.
Yeah. We've been going for a long time.
This is actually something that I've been thinking about for the past few weeks. Is how do we deal with this sort of information overload? I need to just get like some sort of structure in all of this fucking information that I'm getting. I don't know how you organize your information, but
I mean, dude, for me, I honestly kind of I don't know if this is a sutric approach or not or whatever, but I definitely mostly stay off social media besides
Okay.
YouTube and these kind of interactions, which I find extremely valuable. And then recently I had solitude. Honestly, I have been spending a lot more time alone, without a lot of information input besides maybe a book, or just writing. I've been doing that because it's fucked. It's crazy, man. It's it's
Yeah.
I'm with you, Quinn. Like I've cut back on the porn, like so much less porn than usual.
nice.
And then like, so just is that count as information? I feel like it should.
I would
You know
say
what I
Oh,
mean?
so.
for
yeah,
sure, bro.
it's-
Yeah, definitely. That is, yeah, that's
It's sensory
I
overload.
mean,
honestly,
yeah.
Yeah, with that
Well,
said, I think
yeah, I think with the. Oh,
wrap
sorry.
it
Go
up
ahead, man.
with this conversation in a bit, because I'm gonna go to sleep soon and I'm the recording one. So we can
Yeah,
be
I'd be happy to wrap up too, but
if
just
we want.
just quickly to Max's question
Yeah, of course.
about the information thing. I think in Nietzsche, the best metaphor for that is all the talk about digesting something.
Yeah.
So if like the problem is like information glut, think about that, like the digestive system. You're clogged up with too much information. So just continually go back to one piece of information until you actually process it.
Yeah, that's
Like,
a good idea.
I think that's part of the counterbalance there.
absolutely.
Yeah, I'm just doing so much and learning machine learning, learning writing the book, doing this course, the age-old philosophical problem of an artist problem of, as you put in with the meme, James, here's your here's your project. No, I'm gonna start another one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, maybe we need to fast from all the informational flows. You know what I mean? Like
Yes.
a good fasting is or somehow like one meal a day. Something like that.
Right. All right. So we'll any final words, any final reflections before we wrap up, everybody?
This was fun. Thanks for putting this on, Dimitri and Max. This was great.
Yeah. Thanks, gang.
Yeah, thanks for doing it.